Hello, my name is Dr. Buras. I'm the founder of the Classic Planning Institute and one of the participants in the Fractal Roundtable, where we have been doing our neuroscience research at the Institute. I'm going to talk about stuff that's coming out of the laboratory, and I'm going to focus on that cars are perceived as large animals. Now, we all know that 40% of all energy and 40% of all emissions go to and come from buildings. Add to that the 15% that goes to cars used by people to escape modernist downtowns into sprawl suburbs. And you're looking at over 50% of global warming being caused by modernist architecture and planning. And in the 21st century, we are repeating errors from the 21st, like forgetting the human, like blind belief in technology in the built environment, like selling strangeness for progress. I find this particularly offensive. This is not Ukraine. This is a brand new development in Amsterdam, mocking the people who are losing their houses to wartime terror, as if that's a normal thing to express architecturally. And then, of course, annihilating beauty, something that's been going on for well over almost 100 years now, since World War II, and certainly started in 1920. The Classic Planning Institute is devoted to stewarding, teaching, researching, and applying the holistic classical method, which is comprised of the knowledge bases of the world's traditional architecture and urbanism. The values unique to the CPI, number one, is that architecture is central to urbanism. Unlike other planners, basically all of them, we believe that there's no good urbanism without good architecture. You stand in the middle of the street, what you're going to see mostly is buildings. So the plan doesn't really count for that much. Isn't that interesting? But you don't ever experience a plan. You experience the buildings. You experience the elements, the built elements that arise from a plan. A plan is some sort of abstraction. We are genuinely holistic. We do understand that the origin of our ideas come from the Vitruvian translation of the Greek identification of this trinity of truth, goodness, and beauty, translated by Vitruvius into firmness, commodity, and delight, and that it is best conveyed using architectural literacy, which we teach at the Institute. And we also understand that all planning and built environment work and architecture is dependent on a homeostatic balance of town and country. You can't have town without country. You can't have country without town. And finally, we today understand that manual skills construction may be essential for individual, societal, and planetary well-being. All these topics actually emerge from our neuroscience research. So much of the idea of how neuroscience connects with your personal experience, your personal urban aesthetic experience, is talked through in Chapter 6 of the Art of Classic Planning, and in the article that the Fractal Roundtable published last year on what happens in your brain when you walk down the street. The conclusion is that the purpose of urbanism is to create a legacy of beautiful places. So that is telling you how supreme the aesthetic experience actually is. And what we did in that research was use and understand the fractal, the multiple fractals of the environment of our emergence, the landscape of our emergence in Africa, in evaluating the landscapes that are produced by the classical method. In fact, art imitates nature. The experience of art imitates the experience of nature. We do know that mentally and neuroaesthetically, your brain is pinging the same when it's in a classical environment and in the environment of our emergence. We also discovered that there are ambulatory rhythms that the brain processes. We know that the Fractal dimensionalities are essential. I'm not going to go into that right here, but we did discover that there are 150 millisecond cycles that recur, so that when you're walking 60 feet, say, from this red table to the tent, you're going to have 90 to 120 scanning cycles of the brain. And we test this using eye tracking, similar to how Ann Sussman and her team work it through and evaluate. We see where the eye actually stops. It stops where it is driven to do so, either on account of contrast or on account of composition. And you see that in the design for the Eisenhower Memorial by Frank Gehry. The eye doesn't know where to go. It goes everywhere and stops at places that are immaterial to the actual design, like the tops of these posts. But in the traditional design, it goes straight to the location where you have sculpture and the carving actually applied to this. It's a holistic system, and it lights up your brain in the brain's pleasure center when you see something beautiful. We know that from Zeki's work back in the early 2000s, and from our own confirming it. And this is an ongoing project. So we did identify 4 areas of the stable environment neuroaesthetics: the aesthetic experience, what is beauty; the notion that memory is locational, which makes placemaking memory making. That's what we do. And we got to make it beautiful, or it's not going to register in the brain, because we know that modernist designs don't register. They stress the brain. There's the whole hand-eye brain nexus, that relationship. 50% of the brain is devoted to the hands. And you can just understand, of the trillions of synapses in the brain, half of them are about the hands. And we're not using them. As a matter of fact, the recent trend in technology is to ignore the human hand, as if making is a bad thing. So I'm not going to discuss that more over here, just pointing this out. And finally, there's the matter of color, which is of huge importance, and we're not touching on that yet. It is complex, and we're going to get there when we get there. But we did identify that in terms of the mobile environment, there's the matter of the perception of cars. And we understand today, based on neuroscience research with regard to the perception of animals, that cars are perceived as large animals. Now, there is some straight ahead research that shows that both cars and animals are identified in equal amounts in the first 150 to 300 milliseconds of perception of anything. That's telling us that these kind of objects are perceived right away, and they're sort of both equally alarming, if you will, to the brain. As a matter of fact, the perception times, specifically for a lion, impala, a snake, and a lizard, were computed by Jessica Jarzynski back in 2010. And the interesting thing was, obviously, you're going to see a lion really quick, and you're gonna have your heart in your mouth like immediately, because you're lunch. A lizard takes a lot longer because it's not threatening. But look at the numbers for the snake and the impala. They're almost the same. At 30 feet, a snake is a small thing. Probably can't reach you. You want to keep your eye on it. It's not that much of a threat, but it is. But the impala at 30 feet, it can actually attack you. It can kick you. It can take your eye out. It's so the size of the animal actually is of consequence. And we're looking here at something that is within 2 to 3 steps in manual response of these taking place, and a natural response between 1 and 2 steps. In other words, size matters. Animal size and animal standing or reclining is basically you're seeing a certain amount of the animal. So the size of that animal image does matter, and you're going to catch it pretty much right away. And then you can see these 2 pictures, that the presence of a vehicle matters, and your stress escalates right away. So this whole business of, oh, animals, how do we perceive animals so different from how we see the stable environment? Apparently we do, because even since earliest times, we're talking here early Babylon, early Egypt, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years ago, people were making furniture with little feet, with legs, and they're animal legs. So these are small animals. Furniture is small animals because it moves. Furniture is not part of the stable environment. And this continued in Greek and Roman times. And I'll call your attention to this X-shaped kind of a stool thing, which is imitated, echoed in Mies van der Rohe's Barcelona chair, which uses Mercedes-Benz upholstery for the cushions. So you see here the animal legs, you see here the motif, circling back to object as animal. In this case, via cars as moving object. And it raises the question of how car design has changed. You know that today the cars are all much uglier than they used to be. And I'm not going to get into that exactly. I think this is something to be researched further. But there was one thing that did come up in the research that we were wondering about, and that is wheels. Do wheels represent legs? And the answer is a strong yes. So one way of figuring this out, what you're seeing here is actually the very, very first wheels that appeared in humanity. And these wheels came on toys. So you have I think these are Olmec. This is an Olmec toy. You have something from ancient Spain, ancient Greece, ancient Rome, ancient Persia. All of these, all the legs come out to be wheels. So that then the question is, well, are big wheels big legs? So it's a bigger animal, and small wheels smaller legs, that it's a smaller animal? The answer is yes, because bicyclists on the street are alarming both to drivers and to pedestrians. They are really scary. They're about the size of a gazelle. So it's up there with a large animal that's going to get you. And it has big wheels. But people on scooters, the wheels are small. They appear less threatening, both motor scooters and these new little electrical scooters. So they have small wheels that are less threatening. So wheel size is related to animal size. And in car design, you had cars that had spats on them. Their rear wheels were covered. And somehow or other, I don't know if you agree with me, somehow or other, they seem less threatening, making the Citroën DS perhaps the most civilized of all car designs, because it kind of looks not threatening, not so threatening as other cars do. So when we're talking about human neuroception, which is threat detection, with regard to automobiles, it really shifts the AV paradigm, because we need to re-engineer the streets to design them for intuitive responses and reduce the stress caused by cars by either changing car shape while they're parked so they're less threatening, or literally hiding the cars in structures, but you can't make the whole world parking garages. So the way to do that, we can talk about that some other time. But the other part has to do with the separation of town and country experience and the expectations. So we're really looking at a rewriting of the motor vehicle code for separate modes of travel, town and country, not for separate modes of vehicles. Vehicles really don't count much. And you'll see here that neuroception actually guides classic street design. And the rules for that would be, number one, that everyone on the street is a person. We don't care about modes of traffic. We don't design for machines. We design for people. Number two, everyone on the street has 100% directional mobility. Now, that might sound strange to you, But I guarantee that you start sussing through all this, and you will come to the conclusion that you really need to provide for that on a street, not through lanes and markings and signals, but through the interaction, the human behavior of individuals walking on the street. Then you have the notion that street beauty itself reduces stress. That means that you want to detail the street, and its appurtenance is classically because any other style is going to elevate stress. You also want to minimize the carriageways, so there will be fewer locations on a street that will actually enable the movement of threatening vehicles. And finally, you're going to want to plant lots of trees. That really makes for a really improved street. Ultimately, the test is that a safe street is one in which children can play. So the question that we're asking at the end of all this is the classical method neuroaesthetically the best solution for urbanism? I want to thank you very much for listening in, and I want to share with you a 1906 movie showing a film from a tram walking down, riding down Market Street in San Francisco 2 or 3 days before the earthquake, literally. And you can see people just moving around safely. And you will see men, women minding their business, doing their stuff, going from place to place. And really, you get a sense of what organic traffic might look like on a street, where today we think that we are better off, but in fact, the number of fatalities, if you take out trams, which were a huge source of fatalities in the early 1900s, if you take out the trams, you're looking at pretty much the same numbers. There are variations, but we do know that there's been a 40% rise in pedestrian deaths in the last 10 years, putting it at 7,500 people in the United States. So I want to thank you again. And there you go. This is how to create a really, really comfortable and convenient environment for people on streets. Thank you.